Welcome to the first season of the Office Freedom podcast, Flex with Richard Smith. My name is Gavin Alexander, and I'm going to be co-hosting the pod with Richard Smith, who will introduce himself in just a minute. Each and every episode, we're going to chat and hopefully give you some insights into global flexible office space, the trends, the COVID impact on human interaction to working life, and lots of other interesting topics. Joining me today and for the entire season is my co-host Richard Smith, who is the CEO of Office Freedom and all-round office workspace guru. Perhaps, Richard, you can do your own introduction and tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Richard Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Office Freedom, which I established in 1993 when I was 25 years old. Prior to this, I was a commercial property agent specialising in office space in central London for 7 years. Those keen mathematicians amongst you will have quickly deduced that I was 18 when I started work. I was a bit too thick to go to university, and you'd be absolutely right. So yes, I'm pretty boring really. I've just done office space all my working life for about 35 years. And now I've finally plucked up the courage to escape here to the studio to make a complete and utter fool of myself.
Well, Richard, I can promise you're definitely not going to make a fool of yourself today. That's my job to make sure that you don't. I mean, we've talked about this so often over the past few weeks in terms of the content. And actually, personally speaking, I'm really excited to sort of let all the viewers hear your story because it actually is quite fascinating. Richard, let me just ask you, you've been in the business a very long time, like since the start. Where did it all begin for you in terms of Office Freedom?
As I said in my intro, I was a property agent in the West End for about 7 years, specialising in traditional leasing. And I was with a client walking around some offices in Mayfair, in Berkeley Square actually, on our way to an appointment, and we walked past this building and outside it had a sign on it saying business centre. So he said to me, like, what's that? And I said, you know what, I'm not really sure. So we went in, he had a look at the space, and he liked it, and the next day he signed up, and the day after that he moved in. And I was like,
wow, so like no leases, it was just like walk up, sign on the line.
Yeah, it was like 48 hours that the deal was signed and he'd moved in. And I thought, what's a business centre? And I looked into it and I thought, if I can find an industry or a sector of the industry that we're in, whereby deals take 2 days versus 3 to 6 months, I'm in. I thought, I'll have some of that.
So I'm assuming obviously you missed out on commission on that on that stroll through Mayfair. But it set alight a whole idea for you. So, I mean, really, you've been in this sort of sector, in this area of workspace life. I mean, probably forever. So you're a broker, right? So you're an aggregator to end clients.
Yes. So after that, I looked into the marketplace and I realised that there was no property agent that specialised in serviced offices, flexible workspaces. And so I basically knocked on the door of all the serviced offices in London and I said, if we can send you some clients, would you be happy to pay us, to remunerate us? And they said, yes, no problem. So I basically went around London, and then over a short period of time, I then went to the rest of the UK. And then in 2000, wanted to open up in the US, so New York was my first port of call, and it was very funny because the first door that I knocked on, the name of the company, the serviced office provider, was Select Office Suites. What does that stand for?
SOS.
And I thought,
you're SOS.
Yeah. So I knocked on the door. I said, hello, it's Richard Smith from SOS. They said, hold on a minute, we're SOS. And I said, no, I'm SOS. So we had an argument about SOS, and it was all very funny. And it was just a great start to the relationship. And Angela Olivio and Ray Lindenberg, they were both so accommodating and warm, made me feel at home. I explained the concept and they said, yes, if you can send us clients, we would be delighted to work with you. And then, as they say, the rest is history.
I mean, we're talking, the year here, remind me again, was like in the 90s, right? So the internet wasn't necessarily, even a thing back then. So what were the sort of barriers to entry in terms of introducing clients to the space? Because everybody was used to a traditional lease at the time. How difficult was it to sell to people?
Well, it was very strange. It was normal at the time, but looking back on it, it was amazing to think that it was before the internet, before email, before Google. And so generating clients via marketing was through like the good old-fashioned yellow pages, the Evening Standard, to let boards, and just old-fashioned traditional ways of marketing. But the clients love the idea of being able to move into an office that was ready to go, and they could move in within like 24 hours.
And just to explain to everybody, because I mean, plenty of people will be aware of what, serviced office space is, what flexible office space is, but just give me a quick sort of summary of what's the difference, because you actually do both. But
Yes.
what is the difference? Explain to everybody.
Well, there's many differences. First of all, which I've already highlighted, this space is ready to go, ready to move into. Whereas when you lease an office, you obviously have to do the fit out, and you have to get your lawyer to go through a lease. A lease could be 100 pages, and the lawyers would argue with the other lawyer. The tenant lawyers and the landlord's lawyers would
So
be
it's
arguing.
a property transaction.
It's a property transaction.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Now, fitting out a regular lease is obviously expensive. IT, telecoms, furniture, partitioning, the whole shebang. And in a serviced office, it's all there, plug and play. All you need to do really is bring your laptop, and everything else is there. The IT is done, the telecoms are done, and it's really a very immediate process.
So back in the day, it was bring your fax machine.
Yeah, that's how we used to send referrals to all the serviced office centres, was by fax.
I mean, amazing. And just comparing numbers, when you first started out, how in searched office space, how many were you in terms of team, and where are you now?
We started off just me and Lawrence, literally just the two of us, and then it was a slow journey. I mean, the industry itself was slow to take off and evolve. Now we are, this time last year we were a team of 50, and now it's a slightly smaller team because a lot of the team are now working remotely and working from home.
Why was the industry so slow to evolve?
The industry had a lot of plus points, which I've talked about, but it also had some downsides. So, for example, the technology within the accommodation wasn't top drawer. And so therefore larger companies would be concerned about that. The look and feel, I can't pretend that 9 times out of 10 it was a 5-star, look and feel.
And once again, we are talking back in the day, because now some of these offices are whiz bang. I mean, literally, I've seen a few. They're unbelievable, aren't they?
Yeah.
So back in the day, it was a little bit shabby.
Some of them were, and I wouldn't exactly call them ultra contemporary and modern. And also for the larger requirements, it wasn't that easy to find big space. Lots of the accommodation was 1, 2, 3 man offices, so you could combine them to maybe get a 4, 5 to 10, 20 if you're lucky. But if you had a client that wanted 150 desks, something along those lines, you couldn't do it.
So Richard, what's the average size sort of people you put into an office?
The average type deal is probably between 10 and 20 desks, but if a client wants larger amount of space, then they can definitely have it, because a lot of the properties are now much bigger than they used to be.
So tell me, what year did this all start with the serviced office space?
Well, 1966 is a year that we all know, because obviously we won the World Cup. And for my American friends listening to me now, I'm talking about football. Well, I should say soccer.
Soccer.
And that was a momentous year for football, for England, but it was also a momentous year for the industry, because Paul Fegan established the first serviced offices in Los Angeles called Barrister Executive Suites, run by a good friend of mine, Carrie Gates. Also, Premier Business Centres, who are now Premier Workplaces, they set up in 2002, and they now have just over 90 locations of flexible workspaces. In 2004, Pacific Business Centres, now Pacific Workplaces, who operate various locations in the Northern California area, they were also one of the original members of the flexible workspace community. In the UK, it was around 1979 when the Fuchs family set up the first serviced office in Northampton.
Of all places.
And then in 1980, what I call the famous four, there was Clive Dickinson in 35 Piccadilly, there was Maurice Laniardo in Chesham in Regent Street, there was Ronald Moss in 1-11 Hay Hill in Mayfair off Berkeley Square, and there was the legendary Richard Nissen from 211 Piccadilly, now 180 Piccadilly. So that legendary foursome was the originals in London around 1979, which was also a great year for football because Arsenal won the FA Cup. Which is obviously very important to discuss on today's show.
Yeah, well, we'll leave all the football stuff behind, obviously, clearly, because I'm a Tottenham supporter. But let's just agree that we're both appalling at the moment.
You're probably a little bit more appalling than us.
Yeah, maybe. We'll leave that for another day.
In 1987, Workspace PLC, who have 60 properties, they're only in London. They're a FTSE 250 company and 1.4 billion of assets, 3.9 million square feet, and 3,000 members. They started in 87. In 1993, BE, Business Environment Group, founded by industry legend David Sewell. And in 1993, Citybase, who have over 30 UK locations, started around the same time. Yes, BE and Citybase were both in 1993. And Workspace, who along with BizSpace are an example of a flexible workspace company that focus more on the studio, light industrial, and BizSpace have about 100 locations, primarily outside of London. And BizSpace and Workspace and also BE, they own, and Lenter, they own most of their properties. So most operators of Flex operate on the lease arbitrage model, whereby they rent space from the landlord and then they rent space to the tenants. Other types of agreements are turnover leases and management agreements, but a select few operators actually own the freehold of their own properties. And along with owning your own building comes with complete flexibility and the benefits of being able to do what you like to your own building. So yes, it's just interesting to note that those companies were part of the very, very early beginnings of the flexible workspace industry in the UK.
But so if they're the forefathers of service office space, what does that make you?
Well, they were the forefathers of the actual space itself. And I was actually the first broker or agent to recognise the marketplace and the niche of the flexible serviced office market. And like I said, it was like in the early 90s, and we were probably a bit too early, if I'm honest, because when the internet and Google and email, turned up, we were like, what's this? I even said to Lawrence, I said, this internet thing, we should be taking this quite seriously. And he said, don't worry about it. It will never take off. So,
famous last words from Lawrence.
So, yeah. So after that, we had a lot of competitors who joined the market. A lot of them were like 10 years younger than me. So for them, the internet was just like a given. And yeah, it did catch us by surprise a bit. And we were, it did take us a little while to catch up again from a technology point of view.
So Richard, why did you rebrand to Office Freedom from SOS, Search Office Space?
Well, it was around the time when the industry had finally evolved, and all of a sudden the sector was attracting bigger businesses, larger corporations, and I thought to myself, if I'm going to do it, this is the time to do it, because we wanted to then take the promotion of the brand to the next level, and I just thought that SOS has served us well, but some people would say to me, like, is there an emergency? Is there a problem? Is there a cat stuck up in the tree? What do we need? What's that all about? And I just thought that's the time to do it. And it was around 2018. And Office Freedom, I mean, look, what a lovely name, Freedom. Doesn't everyone just want freedom in their lives in all shapes and sizes and all walks of life?
Yeah, and actually the title, the name of the company, Office Freedom, it really does say everything in two words, in terms of not just what you do as a company, but actually the flexible working space. It does. You've done very well there.
Yeah, I mean, freedom and flexibility, they go hand in hand. One of our marketing phrases is find your office freedom. And that really is what today's sector is all about.
So in the very early days, was it difficult promoting your business, promoting the services, and who did it sort of appeal to?
It was always really, really loved by startups and small companies because, to be able to walk into an office and actually just get up and running immediately is just an unbelievable experience, and it enables clients to save a lot of money and have complete flexibility. So for them, it was great, but for reasons that we've discussed, it wasn't so easy attracting the bigger companies. The change has been like unbelievable, unparalleled, and it was a slow journey from the beginning, from like the early 90s, even the 2000s was slow, but in the last between 5-6 years, it's really, really exploded.
You were just way too early.
We were a bit too early.
But you're there now.
But we're here now.
Leading the way.
Leading the way. And like any business, it's unbelievably competitive. But one thing you can't duplicate is 28 years in a sector.
You are literally the granddaddy of office service brokerage.
Well, granddad, I suppose, is a fair comment, although I'm still waiting for my daughter to have a baby.
Well, let's not do that. She's a little bit on the young side. She works for you, actually, doesn't she,
Yes,
Demi?
yeah. Demi has been with me for over a year, and it's unbelievable. I love having her in the office. It's just like having a little mini-me in the office, and everyone says that we are like two peas in a pod.
So it sounds to me like the industry has always suffered from some kind of identity crisis. Why was that?
Well, I think one of the problems was that the industry was referred to by different names in different countries. So serviced offices was a very popular name, and it still is to some degree in the UK. In the US, the phrase executive suites was very popular. And in mainland Europe and Asia, business centres. And so the world seemed to struggle a little bit with what the industry is. It's not, most industries, you can imagine, they've just got one name that describes them worldwide. And also, there were issues like in the US, a lot of the executive suites were a bit dated, and in the UK, a lot of the serviced offices some of them were a bit tired. And so they couldn't quite break out of that mould to reach out to the more SMEs and the larger companies.
And what was the catalyst that changed all this? What player stepped into the market and said, we need to basically revamp offices, give everybody a cooler space?
Well, Regus were there not from the beginning, i.e., like I said before, like the 60s and 70s, but they set up in the 80s and... Well, in fact, when I set up, there was only one or two Regus centres, one in Northumberland Avenue.
Was it Mark Dixon?
Yes, Mark Dixon, and one in Brussels, actually. And now they've got like 3,300 centres in 110 countries. They're now like worth about £3.65 billion.
And how does that compare to someone, let's say, like WeWork?
That was one of the reasons why the industry finally grew up and evolved. In 2010, I liken it a little bit to what happened with Manchester City and Chelsea. With the greatest respect to those clubs,
Richard, please tell me all routes are not going to lead back to football.
Well,
every analogy.
I do have a passion for football, but I think this is quite...
Man City and Chelsea,
well,
we know what's coming.
Well, look, let's be honest. They were clubs who were meandering along in like averageness on a good day. So when the SoftBank, who ploughed probably up to about $10 to $11 billion into WeWork, at the same time as Roman Abramovich put billions into Chelsea, and also the Middle Eastern backers put billions into Manchester City. So overnight, they evolved wasn't even evolved, it was an overnight revolution into something completely different. And that's what happened in our industry. Regus were already there, and they have grown to be like the biggest, by far right now, the biggest, with 3,300 locations, as I said. But WeWork had that funding, and all of a sudden, the industry received a lot more recognition and exposure, because as opposed to setting up buildings that were 15 to 25,000 square feet, which was the average size of a serviced office in those days, they started opening buildings. Some were 50,000, some were 100,000, even 200,000 square feet. Like monster.
And we're talking top spec offices.
They were very high spec buildings, but but they had a quite a specific look and feel. But they definitely hit the spot, because I go to a lot of conferences. I travel, well, when I was able to travel, to the US a lot, go to a lot of corporate real estate conferences, and all your household names like Amazon, Facebook, HSBC, they were all telling me that they've got big chunks of space with WeWork. So they've definitely had a big impression on the industry. And yes, they've had a bit of a roller coaster. They were going to float at a potential valuation of $48 billion, but that didn't happen. And they have now changed their ownership. Dare I say, it's probably run a little bit more sensibly. They don't have the corporate jet anymore. That type of thing.
What a shame.
Well, yeah, I was waiting for my invite to go on that, actually, but never quite happened. I missed the boat there. Now they're talking about potentially going public via a SPAC for around the 10 billion mark. It's being mooted. It's not confirmed by any means. So, yeah, the investment happened, and loads of other investment also appeared in the industry, and lots of other operators appeared as well, like Convene, like Industrious, like Labs, like Fora, and all of a sudden the look and feel and the whole quality of your average serviced office just went up like 1,000%. And that's why today's spaces are now embraced by the world's biggest corporations.
So there's lots of different terminology out there, and just so maybe all the viewers and listeners on the podcast can understand, what's the sort of definition of, let's say, co-working?
Yeah, co-working, the original definition of co-working is a group of people working in an office, a bit like this actually, like me and you working in an office, and we don't know each other. So there's not really very secure or private, but that is just the look and feel of the original definition of co-working.
So I would take a desk, you take a desk, we'd happen to sit next to each other, we'd have nothing to do with each other, we'd just happen to be co-workers. Not co-workers in the sense of
colleagues,
people,
not colleagues.
We're not colleagues.
No,
okay.
No. And that market does still exist. It's not really the type of market that we do a lot of business in, if I'm honest, but there is a demand for that. But the deals that we do are in just regular office space, regular self-contained private office space in flexible workspaces. And now co-working definition has become a lot broader. So now in the US, and by the way, this identity crisis is still here a little bit, because in the US, co-working is referred to as the definition of flexible workspace. You could get Facebook taking 500 desks in New York City with WeWork, and they're saying, yeah, we've got a co-working space there. They're actually in their entire building or their entire floors, private, self-contained space. Nobody can go there.
But they call it co-working.
And they call it co-working. So it's really just the definition of flexible workspace in the US. Whereas in the UK, serviced offices is still there, but it does have a bit of an association with a little bit of a dirty word sometimes, because back in the day, serviced offices were like, oh no, too expensive. I don't really like the look and feel, and it's not for me. I'm going to give it a pass. So that's one of the reasons that flexible workspace evolved to take over serviced offices to some degree in the UK. And that is the main phrase in the UK is flexible workspace.
Now, I said I'd throw some questions in at you that just sort of come to mind as we chat. But if I looked at, let's say, for example, a traditional lease on an office space versus a flexible office space, is one more expensive than the other? Is it just a barrier to entry thing? Why would I go for a lease now versus a flexible workspace?
Well, the percentage of the marketplace that is flex is probably now about 10 to 15%.
Oh, is that all?
That's all. But remember, not so long ago, 5-10 years ago, it was probably at the 2% mark. So it has increased dramatically, and that trajectory will continue. It is predicted that by about 2030, it will be 30%. And the marketplace is grown, and there's a complete variation of spaces available. I mean, like anything in life, if you want rustic, cool and trendy, or you want contemporary, modern or traditional, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of varieties of these spaces.
So when I come to Office Freedom's website, I can literally see the differences, see the different styles that I potentially would like to put my staff into?
Yeah, I mean, the website is there to give a guide on availability and properties, but actually what we actually specialize in is a personal service. I like to call it like a personal shopper, if you like. We are your personal shopper. Imagine going to a shopping mall and you're looking for a suit, and in the shopping mall there is 1,000 suits, and where do you start?
So you give your requirements.
Yeah, we take the brief from the client, and they give us all their requirements, and then we will pick out like 5 to 10 needles in the giant haystack of options for them to go and see, and we'll arrange the viewings. And then once they have decided on the space that they want to go with, then we negotiate on their behalf to obtain like the optimum savings on flexible terms.
Now, I would say that I know, obviously, and the viewers and the listeners now know of your experience in terms of you go back forever. So your ability to negotiate with the landlords is exceptional. I mean, over someone going themselves. That's why people come to you, right?
I would say that our model has evolved into a similar model to the US tenant rep model. Like agents in the US, they represent tenants, but they're paid by the landlord. So the tenant gets the best of both worlds. The tenant gets a free service, and they also get the agent negotiating on their behalf. And, we've been in this, many, many years. So we really do know our way around the block, so to speak. So, yeah, we're very good at negotiating savings for clients.
And so the service is 100% free to any client who comes to you. You're remunerated by?
Yes, the service is free, and we're paid by... See, I've aggregated relationships with basically over 15,000 locations worldwide. Wow. So we have built up over the years an incredible inventory. It's like where you can compare the entire market in flexible office space, so that the end user, the client, they don't really need to go anywhere else because we've got all the properties under one roof.
Like the Expedia of serviced office space.
Exactly.
Flexible offices.
Yes.
So, Richard, coming back to my actual question, which is, why would someone take a lease still over flexible office space?
Well, it's a good question, Gav.
Thanks.
And I have to say that there aren't many instances that I can imagine whereby a client would need to take a lease. The reality is that the marketplace at the moment is still 15% flex and 85% lease, so it definitely hasn't hit the spot with the entire marketplace. But one of the main reasons would be if somebody wanted, 50 or 100,000 square feet. That type of inventory isn't immediately available in the flexible world, but there are some availabilities. But the way around that is that we have many operators that we represent that will go and take the brief from the client, and they'll go and lease the space themselves. So the operator will go and take a traditional lease on the office and then do a back-to-back like managed deal to the end user. And for that, they will do the fit out as well. So you can imagine how much fit outs cost for 50 or 100,000 square feet. And by the way, or 20,000 square feet, or any size really. But the smaller you go, the more likely you can find it within existing inventory. But if you wanted something that was much, much bigger, you can do a back-to-back managed deal whereby the client, the business centre would take the space on their own lease, take the full repairing and insuring liability.
And convert it into
a customised space that matches the needs and the fit out and configuration, IT and everything of the client. Where that way the client avoids taking a full repair and insuring lease liability.
I mean, that's pretty amazing when you talk about the numbers and we talk about the history, and it goes back from being 1%, 2%, 3% of the market, and you're really maybe only 10 to 15% now. So the growth opportunity is still pretty spectacular.
Yeah. I think in the next few years, most definitely, that will be accelerating, and I would say at a warp speed, if I'm honest, especially considering what's going on in the world right now.
I know one of the other topics we're going to cover in another episode is really where we are in the world now, because you and I have discussed at length that as we come out of this post-pandemic world and people start returning to the offices, it's going to be a change of landscape. People are thinking very, very differently. And that must be quite an exciting time for you and your team.
Yes. I mean, the question on everybody's lips is, what's going to happen next? Now that the UK have a roadmap outside, to exit lockdown, everyone is asking themselves what's going to happen about going back to work, and what type of agreements will clients be looking at taking.
So, Richard, just to sort of sum it up, what does flexible workspace incorporate?
Well, it's a good question. It's a very broad term. I would say that it incorporates serviced offices, co-working, virtual offices, memberships, hot desking, meeting rooms, and flexi leasing. Really all types of flexible working and agile working.
So, and that's a term we've discussed as well. Agile working just encapsulates everything.
Yeah, I mean, agile is a word that is going to be used a lot more going forward because it implies a mix between working from the office, working from home, working locally. It brings you onto the phrase of what's being coined as hub and spoke.
Hub and spoke.
Hub and spoke is a term that means a mixture of centrally located offices and suburban. So the hub being the central, for example, central London, and the suburban being, for example, Mill Hill. Now, me and you both live relatively close to Mill Hill, but we don't live that close to the West End. So there might be some occasions when we want to work close locally, but not at home. Working at home is great. And I love going downstairs and after woken up, have a shower, go downstairs, and then there I am at my desk. But sometimes I don't love the noise or the dog barking.
Or the speed of your broadband.
Or the speed of my broadband. That can be a problem. So, hub and spoke, working a mixture of locally and centrally and from home. That's really what is under the umbrella of agile working, which is under the umbrella of flexible workspace.
You do actually cover leasing as well. You do have a team that do it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, leasing is still 85% of the marketplace. You can't pretend it doesn't exist. Yes, a lot of our clients are transitioning out of leases into flex, but it's still there and it's still the bulk of the world's office space. I was a leasing agent before I did SOS and now Office Freedom, and I've always had an affinity to office agency. And we partner with a lot of office agents who sometimes outsource the serviced office inquiries to us because they know that we cover the entire market. I mean, in London alone, there's over 1,000 options. 1,000. I mean, everyone's heard of the 2 or 3 or 4 of the big guys, but when you're dealing with a client that needs an office, you actually just got to cover the whole marketplace. So they're often outsourced to us. And when we do leasing, because a lot of the serviced office operators that we work with, they also ask us to help find them new buildings because they want to open up, increase their footprint to accommodate today's needs. So we do have a team that does leasing, finds buildings on behalf of operators, and also if we have clients that do need space themselves and they do insist on going down the leasehold route, then we can accommodate them. So it's a very rounded service. It just so happens that a lot of the business we do is the flex route.
Right, looks like we're out of time. Thank you for joining us on our first episode of Office Freedom, the podcast. Richard, have your nerves disappeared?
A little bit. I'm feeling a little bit more confident, and thank you very much. That's all down to you, by the way.
Yeah,
so,
it wasn't as bad as you thought. I told you you'd be okay. Don't forget, as always, to like and subscribe to the channel, and do hit the notification button. If you have any questions for Richard, you can get in touch via email. All the details are below, or you can drop the question in the comments box. Until next time.